The year is 1815, the time is 6 o'clock in the morning. You aren't woken by a gentle sunrise or the distant crow of a rooster. Instead, your sleep is shattered by a sound that slices through the gloom, the sharp, metallic clang of a heavy key turning in a lock, followed by the groan of an iron door being dragged open. This is your alarm clock here, in London's Bethlem Royal Hospital, a place the world knows better by its other name Bedlam. You are an inmate, and your day has just begun, whether you like it or not. In the first moments of consciousness, the cold is what you notice most. It seeps into your bones from the stone floor and walls of the long gallery where you sleep. You're lying on a thin mattress, little more than a sack filled with straw that rustles and crackles with every small movement. The air you breathe is damp and carries a distinct foul odour. This, according to the hospital governors, is by design. The windows in the upper stories of this brand new building were intentionally left unglazed. Their official reasoning was that it provided necessary ventilation to combat what they called the disagreeable effluvius peculiar to all madhouses. For you, this high-minded theory just means you are perpetually exposed to the elements, your body a testament to their apathetic form of care. Now, you and the dozens of others shuffling out of your sleeping cells are herded into a line. Welcome to morning ablutions. An attendant with a weary, indifferent expression moves down the row, overseeing the process. You dip your hands into a basin of icy water, the shock of it making you gasp. They check your skin, brush your hair with rough, hurried strokes. You quickly learn this isn't about your comfort or cleanliness. It's an inspection. It's a moment for them to assert their complete authority over you, to assess the physical state of their human property. It's a quiet, daily reminder that your body is no longer your own. For some of your fellow patients, the morning routine is even more degrading. Down in the damp basement galleries, a special kind of misery awaits those labelled incontinent. Imagine spending your night on a bed of loose straw, which does almost nothing to absorb filth or offer any real warmth. For these individuals, the morning begins with being stripped and scrubbed down, a process of profound humiliation performed with cold efficiency. Their day starts by being punished for the symptoms of their illness, a cycle of degradation that feels less like treatment and more like a carefully orchestrated punishment. This whole system, you realize, is designed not for healing, but for containment and control, at the absolute expense of your basic human dignity. Breakfast is the next item on the rigid schedule. You are shuffled into a large, echoing hall where the meal starkly illustrates the asylum's unwritten class system. If your family were wealthy, you might be in a private room, receiving a more substantial meal of eggs, perhaps some bacon, and a proper cup of tea. But you are a pauper lunatic, one of the vast majority. For you, breakfast is a meagre affair. You're handed a wooden bowl filled with a lumpy, thin porridge, a hunk of dry bread, and a tin cup of a weak, lukewarm beverage that might be tea or cocoa. It's just enough to quiet the gnawing hunger in your stomach, but never enough to make you feel truly nourished. The profound sense of neglect at mealtime is something that resonates across institutions and decades. In 1885, a patient named Mary Huestis Pengilly kept a secret diary during her time in a provincial asylum. Her words give a voice to the silent desperation you feel. She wrote of her constant hunger, of begging an attendant for a simple glass of milk, something so small yet so vital. "How unkind Mrs. Mills is today," she wrote. "I begged for milk today, and she can't spare me any." The injustice of it all pours from her pen, a question that hangs in the cold air of your own dining hall. Have I not a right to all I require to feed me and make me well? Her question goes unanswered, just as yours does. The truth was, the asylum's purpose was not to make you well, but to manage you cheaply. Now that the meagre breakfast is over, your day truly begins. It's time for what the doctors and reformers call therapeutic employment. This was a central pillar of the new moral treatment philosophy that was supposed to revolutionize mental health care. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, reformers like Philippe Pinel in France and William Tuke in England argued that meaningful labor could be a powerful medicine for the mind. They believed that by keeping you busy with productive work, they could help you master your symptoms, divert your thoughts from morbid obsessions, and restore your sense of purpose and discipline. It sounded wonderful on paper, The founders of asylums like Hanwell, near London, were convinced that work was absolutely essential for your recovery. But here's the thing about grand philosophies. They rarely survive contact with reality. In practice, this occupational therapy had far less to do with your individual healing and far more to do with the institution's bottom line. You quickly discover that you are not a patient receiving therapy, you are an unpaid labourer keeping the asylum afloat. The work is strictly divided along the rigid gender lines of the Victorian era. If you are a man, you are marched out of the main building, regardless of the weather. Your destination is the asylum's extensive grounds. Imagine you are sent to the asylum farm. You spend your day engaged in grueling physical labour, digging fields, tending to livestock, or harvesting crops. At the Buckinghamshire County Asylum, for example, male patients performed all the gardening and husbandry needed to sustain the institution. The scale of these operations was enormous. At Hanwell Asylum, the produce grown by your hands and the hands of your fellow inmates was so abundant that it was shipped directly to London markets to generate income. They even had a dedicated canal dock built just for this purpose. You are not just a patient, you are a key part of a commercial enterprise, your therapy measured in bushels and shillings. If you weren't sent to the fields, perhaps you'd be in one of the workshops. You might be assigned to the bakery, the brewery, or the tailor's shop, endlessly producing goods for the asylum's consumption. The work is repetitive and exhausting. The air in the bakery is thick with flour dust, while the brewery is damp and smells of yeast. Through it all, you are watched, managed, and directed. It is work without reward, labour without meaning beyond the needs of the institution. If you are a woman, your therapeutic employment looks very different, though it is no less grueling. You are kept indoors, your tasks reinforcing the domestic roles society has already assigned to you. Your world shrinks to the four walls of the asylum service wing. Perhaps you are sent to the laundry. Welcome to a cavern of steam, noise, and sweat. Here, you and dozens of other women spend 10 hours a day washing the linens for the entire hospital. At a place like Hanwell, as many as 150 women could be working at the heavy mangles at any one time. The air is so thick with humidity it's hard to breathe, and the constant physical exertion leaves your muscles screaming in protest. Or maybe you're assigned to the needle room. In this deceptively quiet space, you sit on a hard wooden bench for hours on end. Your task is to mend the clothes, sheets, and uniforms for hundreds of patients and staff. Your fingers grow raw from the constant work. The only sounds are the quiet snip of scissors and the endless rhythmic push and pull of needle through cloth. It's a mind-numbing, repetitive task. While this work certainly kept the asylum running and slashed its operational costs, its therapeutic value was, to put it mildly, questionable. This wasn't a path to recovery, it was a system of forced labor conveniently disguised in the benevolent language of therapy. You are not learning a skill for a future life, you are simply a cog in a large, self-sufficient machine. Now, what if you are deemed too ill to work? Or perhaps you're too frail, or maybe you're just feeling uncooperative today. For you, the day offers something else: structured idleness. You are herded out into what are called airing courts. Don't let the name fool you. These are not idyllic parks or pleasant gardens. Imagine a high-walled enclosure, often with iron bars or wire mesh covering the top, like a cage for a wild animal. Here, you are left to pace back and forth for a prescribed period in the morning and again in the afternoon. You are under the constant watch of attendants, your every move observed. There's nothing to do but walk, or sit on a cold stone bench, or stare at the wall. At some institutions, even this exercise was weaponized for control. At the Norfolk County Asylum, for example, patients in the airing courts were subjected to military-style marching drills. An inspector from the National Lunacy Commission observed this practice and noted it down with approval. In his report, he wrote that through such drills, great control is gained over the patients, and the task of taking a vast number for air and exercise becomes comparatively easy. His comment lays bare the chilling truth. This activity wasn't for your well-being, it was for the staff's convenience. It was about making you compliant, manageable, and easy to control. It was about order, not healing. The day, which began with the harsh clang of a lock, concludes with the very same sound. 8 o'clock in the evening arrives with the same rigid discipline that has governed every other minute of your day. It's time for bed. You are marched back into the main building, back to the vast dormitory-style wards. Inside the ward, you see long rows of beds, each spaced only a few feet apart. There is no privacy here, no personal space to call your own. The air is filled with the sounds of coughing, muttering, and quiet sobbing from your fellow inmates. You climb onto your straw mattress, the rustling sound a familiar, unwelcome comfort. Attendants walk the length of the ward, their footsteps echoing off the stone, and then you hear it, the final sound of the day. The turning of keys in heavy locks, one after another, sealing you in for another 12 hours of confinement. The sound is a stark, final reminder of your status. You are not a patient in a hospital. You are a prisoner in a place that is, in almost every meaningful way, a jail. This entire daily routine, from the 6,000 AM bell to the 8,000 PM lockdown, was a meticulously crafted system. Reformers presented this structure as the cornerstone of moral treatment, a benevolent system designed to impose calming order on a supposedly disordered mind. They argued that a disciplined day, filled with meaningful work and simple living, would gently guide you back to sanity. But as you've experienced, the practical function of this routine was something far more sinister. The truth was that it was a powerful and relentless tool of institutional control and dehumanization. It was a machine designed to break you down, not build you up. Somehow, through it all, people managed to endure. But the cost was immense. The routine systematically stripped you of your autonomy. Every minute of your day was dictated by someone else. It stripped you of your privacy, forcing you to eat, sleep, and exist under constant surveillance. And most devastatingly, it stripped you of your individual identity. You were reduced to a pauper lunatic, an inmate, a worker, a body to be managed. The person you were before you entered these walls begins to feel like a distant memory, a ghost from another life. The stark contradiction between the asylum's stated purpose and the lived reality of its inmates is where the true horror lies. First-hand accounts, like the diary kept by Mary Pengelly, reveal an experience not of healing, but of profound imprisonment and an agonizing loss of self. Near the end of her diary, she captured the devastating psychological toll of this routine in a single, heartbreaking sentence. After catching a glimpse of her own reflection, she wrote, "I can't bear to see myself in the glass. I am so wasted."
So miserable.
In the end, that is what the routine was for. By reducing you to a cog in a self-sufficient machine, by making your world one of institutional drudgery, controlled exercise, inadequate food, and squalid living conditions, the daily regimen became a form of psychological oppression. It was perfectly and terribly disguised as therapy. Don't worry, the worst is yet to come. This routine was just the baseline. For those who resisted, or for those whose illnesses presented in more challenging ways, the asylum had other, more direct methods of treatment waiting in its arsenal. We have now lived through a day in Bedlam, from the jarring clang of the morning bell to the final, echoing turn of the key at night. The foundations of this world, built on a routine of despair, have been laid. If you have navigated these opening passages with me, you have felt the chill from the unglazed windows and the weight of the evening lockdown. The path ahead, however, twists into a darker and more public spectacle. Soon, we will witness the doctor's cure for madness, a spinning rotational chair designed to induce vertigo and terror. We will untangle the legal threads that allowed a husband to commit his wife for the crime of novel reading. But before we descend into those circles of therapy and injustice, we must first confront the crowd gathering at the gates. The doors of the asylum are about to be thrown open, not for compassion but for commerce. If you wish to continue this journey and see what happens when human suffering becomes a shilling's entertainment, consider leaving a like on this dispatch. Subscribe to the channel to ensure your ticket is stamped for the next, and most public, act of our story. For now, take a breath. The show is about to begin. You are walking through the noisy, crowded streets of London, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and damp wool. You've heard tales of a place that is both a hospital and a spectacle, an institution known to everyone as Bedlam. Officially, it's called Bethlehem Royal Hospital, and its imposing new home at Moorfields is a statement of grandeur. You stand before it, a palace built to house the mad, its grand facade a deliberate piece of self-advertisement designed to draw you and your money inside. In the early 18th century, you find that visiting Bedlam isn't some clandestine, shameful activity. In fact, it's encouraged. The hospital's governors have a deliberate policy to attract what they call people of note and quality. That means you, if you are wealthy, educated, or well-bred, you are ushered past the gates, the clamour of the city fading behind you, replaced by an unsettling, echoing quiet within the cold stone corridors. Your guide explains the purpose of your visit. It is, you are told, an opportunity to excite compassion in your heart for the wretched souls within, inspiring you to make a generous donation to support this charitable work. The whole experience is framed as a deeply moral one. As you step cautiously along the ward, the air growing colder and tasting of stone dust and unwashed bodies, you are told that this is more than charity, it is an education. The people you are about to see are living cautionary tales. They are stark examples of what happens when one gives in to vice, immorality, or passions that are not kept in check. The sounds of distant, mournful cries drift down the long gallery, a chilling soundtrack to your virtuous lesson. For you, the educated observer, this is meant to be a humbling sight, a reminder to moderate your own pride. A contemporary account perfectly captures the intended feeling of your visit. Standing in these chilly, dim halls, you are meant to reflect that, sheer, we may see the mighty reasoners of the earth, below even the insects that crawl upon it. The guide's voice is calm and measured as he explains the lesson. Sheer, from so humbling a sight we may learn to moderate our pride, and to keep those passions within bounds, which if too much indulged, would drive reason from her seat, and level us with the wretches of this unhappy mansion. You are supposed to walk away from this feeling not entertained but edified, your sense of moral superiority comfortably intact. Through it all, the institution benefits from your compassion, ensuring its survival through a steady stream of donations and bequests from people just like you. But here's the thing. While the wealthy and well-bred were invited for their moral edification, they were not the only ones walking these halls. For most visitors, the motivation was far simpler and far more raw. The truth was, for the price of just 1 shilling, anyone could come to Bedlam. Imagine for a moment you are now a common Londoner, perhaps a shopkeeper or an apprentice, looking for a bit of a thrill on your day off. You hand over your coin, the metal cool and smooth in your palm, and the gates swing open for you. The experience you're about to have has nothing to do with charity and everything to do with entertainment. In the 18th century, your shilling buys you access to what was considered a rare diversion. You join a throng of other curious spectators, the air filled with their chatter and nervous laughter. The smells are overwhelming, the sweat of the crowd, the damp chill of the building, and a pervasive, sour odour of human misery that clings to the very stones. What you and the thousands of others who flocked here were really seeking was what historian Roy Porter so perfectly called the frisson of the freak show. You've paid your ticket, and now you can roam the fetid hallways and gawk at the inmates, their suffering repackaged as a public amusement. This wasn't a minor sideshow, it was a significant source of income. Your shilling, and the shillings of countless others, contributed directly to the hospital's operating budget. This created a strange and disturbing business model where the institution's financial health was tied to its ability to present its patients as a compelling spectacle. You are not a compassionate benefactor, you are a customer. The human beings locked in these cells, rattling their chains or staring blankly into space, have become the product. Somehow, they managed to turn an asylum into one of London's most popular and cheapest tourist attractions. If you need a clear image of what this scene looked like, you need only turn to the artist William Hogarth. In 1735 he captured the essence of this practice in the final, harrowing engraving of his series, The Rake's Progress. Imagine yourself standing within that very print. You are one of the 2 wealthy ladies, your fine silk dresses rustling as you peer into the chaos of the ward, a fan held delicately to your face. The air is cold, but you hardly notice. Your attention is on the scene, a gallery of curiosities. Before you, the series hero Tom Rakewell has finally descended into madness, naked and raving on the stone floor. His suffering is the centerpiece of the exhibit. Around you in Hogarth's scene, other fashionable Londoners, a clergyman, a musician, observe the inmates with a detached, casual air. They look as if they are admiring animals in a menagerie or sculptures in a gallery. You might feel a prickle of discomfort, but you also feel a strange sense of distance. The moans of the residents and the clanking of chains become a kind of background noise, the ambient sound of the exhibition. The texture of your own fine clothes feels a world away from the rough rags and cold iron you see before you. Hogarth's work isn't just a dramatic artistic vision, it's a vital piece of historical evidence. This engraving reveals just how deeply normalized this voyeuristic practice had become. It was woven into the very social fabric of 18th century London. The human impact, so powerfully illustrated by Hogarth, was the complete and utter dehumanization of the patients. They were no longer seen as sick people in need of care, but as objects of morbid curiosity. The visitors in the print are not sombre or compassionate, they are tourists at a public show, and their presence underscores a profound societal indifference to the suffering they've paid to witness. Don't worry, your shilling has been well spent, the show is quite memorable. Now, you might be thinking that surely this awful practice had to end. And it did, sort of. In 1770, the era of unrestricted public access to Bedlam was officially brought to a close. Imagine you arrive at the gates after this date. You can no longer simply pay your shilling and walk in. Instead, a new system is in place. You now require a special ticket, one that has been personally signed by one of the hospital's governors. On the surface, this feels like a moment of genuine progress. This reform seemed like a positive step forward. To an outsider in 1770, it would have appeared that the hospital was finally taking control of the unruly crowds and curbing the worst excesses of the public spectacle. You might breathe a sigh of relief, feeling that the unfortunate patients would now be spared the daily humiliation of being gawked at by strangers. The noise, the mockery, the sheer stress of being on constant display, all of that would now, presumably, come to an end. It looked like a more humane and enlightened approach. But the truth was, this reform had a dark and paradoxical consequence, one that would ultimately prove to be even more harmful for the people inside. The terrible irony is that closing the doors on the public also removed the only, albeit deeply flawed, form of public oversight that ever existed at Bedlam. While the new ticket system may have saved the inmates from the jeers of the crowd, it also shielded the hospital's inner workings from any external scrutiny. Welcome to the new Bedlam. From a patient's perspective, the quiet is the most terrifying change. Before, the sounds of the public, however intrusive, were a connection to the outside world. Now, there is only silence, broken by the echo of a keeper's footsteps on the stone floor, a sound that carries a new kind of menace. With the public gaze gone, the attendants and physicians were no longer accountable to anyone. Historians and evidence from the period are very clear on this point. It was in the years after 1770, after public access was curtailed, that the worst patient abuses occurred. The cruelty was simply driven underground. This crucial detail complicates any simple story of progress. The reform that was meant to protect patients inadvertently created a vacuum of accountability, an environment where systematic neglect and methodical cruelty could flourish in secret, far from prying eyes. This history reveals a perverse and destructive symbiosis. For decades, the asylum's financial dependence on donations created a powerful reason to commodify its patients' suffering, turning the hospital wards into a bizarre theatre. The survival of the institution was directly linked to the public's appetite for viewing misery. This is the first layer of public complicity. You, as a visitor, were an active voyeur, your shilling funding the very system that exploited the vulnerable. It was a corrupt system from the start. But when this practice was reformed, a second, more insidious form of complicity emerged. With the doors closed, the public became indifferent outsiders. You were now content not to see what was happening behind those high walls. The reform didn't end the cruelty, it just allowed it to happen in the dark, where no one had to feel uncomfortable about it. The public was thus involved twice over, first as paying spectators in a human zoo, and later as a society that chose to look away. So next time you think about progress, remember the story of Bedlam's visitors. Sometimes the most well-intentioned changes can create the deepest shadows, and closing the door on a problem rarely makes it go away. It's the 1850s and you've been inside the asylum for several weeks. The initial shock has worn off, replaced by a dull, constant dread. Today, a keeper informs you that your treatment is about to begin. You're led not to a quiet room for a gentle chat, but to a wing of the building that hums with a strange mechanical energy. The air in this part of the asylum is different. It's thick with the metallic smell of wet machinery and a faint, sharp odour you can't quite place. For the first time, you are told that the doctors have a scientific plan to make you well. This wasn't just about controlling your behaviour, this was medicine. Now, it's easy for us to look back and assume the staff were simply cruel. But here's the thing, many of the most brutal practices were rooted in what was considered legitimate science at the time. In the mid-19th century, you find yourself at the mercy of doctors who genuinely believed they were helping. Evidence from their own journals suggests they saw madness not as a psychological issue, but as a physical one. Your mind wasn't broken, your body was just out of balance. This simple, flawed idea gave them a veneer of medical respectability for what was to come. It allowed them to justify almost anything in the name of a cure. Imagine you are sitting in a small, cold examination room. The doctor explains your condition using words that sound official and complicated. He might mention the ancient idea of humoral theory, suggesting the essential fluids in your body are imbalanced. Or perhaps he uses newer, more fashionable terms like cerebral congestion. He tells you that your brain is simply getting too much blood, causing your agitation or melancholy. You can feel the cold draft coming from under the door, a constant reminder of the damp chill that permeates the entire building. The doctor's theories meant that your personal history, your thoughts, and your fears were irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was fixing the physical machine that was your body. To the 19th century physician, your mental state was a symptom of a biological problem that required an aggressive physical solution. If your brain was congested, it needed to be cleared. If your body had toxic impurities, they needed to be purged. You listen to this diagnosis, the scratchy wool of your institutional clothing irritating your skin. The logic, in its own strange way, feels complete. It transformed everyday objects, a chair, a bath, a bucket of water, into sophisticated medical equipment. And it gave the men in charge the moral authority to use them on you, all for your own good. So next time you see a doctor, just take a moment to appreciate that they'll probably just prescribe you pills, not a machine designed to spin you into submission. This scientific justification had a profound human impact. It took away your voice. In the world of the asylum, you weren't a person with a story, you were a puzzle to be solved with a physical key. Your protests, your cries, your logical arguments, they were all dismissed as further symptoms of your disease. The very act of resisting the treatment was seen as proof that you needed it more. You're trapped in a perfect loop of logic, where your sanity is judged by your willingness to endure things that feel insane. Don't worry, they told you. This is science. It's meant to make you better. Through it all, the only thing you could do was hope to be strong enough to survive the cure. Welcome to the hydrotherapy wing. You would have found that water was considered one of the most versatile tools in the asylum's arsenal. It could be used for sedation or for punishment, depending entirely on what the doctor felt you needed that day. The air here hangs heavy and damp, smelling of wet canvas and stagnant water. The sound of dripping echoes off the tiled walls, a constant, maddening rhythm. Your bare feet stick to the cold, grimy floor as you are led toward your bath. This therapy was designed to act directly on your body, to calm your nerves or shock your system into compliance. Let's say you've been diagnosed with melancholy. For this, the doctors prescribe a long, warm bath. In the center of the room, you see a large, coffin-like tub. But this is no simple soak. You are made to lie in a canvas hammock that is then suspended inside the tub of warm water. The water feels pleasant at first, a rare moment of warmth in this cold place. But then, they cover the tub with a heavy canvas sheet, with only a small hole left for your head. You are now trapped, unable to move, your body submerged. You can feel the canvas becoming waterlogged and heavy against your skin. This wasn't for an hour, according to asylum records. This treatment could last for many hours, and in some documented cases, for days. Somehow, people endured this, stewing in their own filth, until the doctors decided their melancholy was sufficiently soothed. But here's the thing, if you were deemed excitable, manic, or just plain disobedient, the prescription changed dramatically. For you, the cure was cold water, and it was used as a weapon of submission. One of the most common techniques was simple and brutal. In a bare, tiled room, you are forced to sit naked on a wooden chair. You can feel the hard, wet wood pressing into your skin. Attendants then bring in buckets of frigid water and, without warning, pour them over your head. The shock is absolute. It steals your breath and makes your heart hammer in your chest. The goal, as one physician wrote, was to reduce you to a calm, obedient state. For a more advanced treatment, you might be introduced to the shower bath. Imagine being restrained in a narrow stool or a cage. High above you is a nozzle, and from it a powerful jet of ice-cold water is aimed directly at your face and head. You can't turn away. You can't breathe without inhaling water. The pressure is immense, a punishing force designed to overwhelm your senses. The most extreme form of this hydrotherapy involved a special chair designed to repeatedly dunk you into a tank of cold water. You are plunged under, held there until your lungs burn, then brought up gasping for air, only to be plunged back down again and again, until you are on the very brink of unconsciousness. The truth was, the aim wasn't healing. It was to use the primal fear of drowning to break your will. If you still showed signs of disobedience after the ordeal, they would simply do it again the next day. Now, if water wasn't deemed sufficient to cure you, the asylum had a whole range of mechanical devices at its disposal. In the 1840s, you might find yourself face to face with an invention that looked like a grotesque piece of carnival equipment. These weren't crude tools built by sadistic keepers. Many were designed by the most respected medical minds of the era. They were seen as the cutting edge of psychiatric technology, a way to physically manipulate the brain back into a state of order. You are led into a room that smells of oil and leather, and you see it a large, sturdy chair mounted on a spinning mechanism. This particular device was the rotational chair, and it was invented by none other than Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin. You are strapped into it tightly, your arms, legs, and head completely immobilized. The keeper then begins to turn a crank, and the world starts to spin. It begins slowly, but soon picks up speed, reaching, according to some accounts, up to 100 rotations per minute. The feeling is dizzying, a violent vertigo that churns your stomach. The explicit goal was to induce extreme nausea and vomiting, which was considered a therapeutic shock to your system. After hours on this machine, you would be left weak, disoriented, and utterly compliant. Congratulations, you have just experienced state-of-the-art mental health care. Another celebrated invention you might encounter was the tranquilizing chair, designed by Dr. Benjamin Rush, often called the father of American psychiatry. Imagine a large, high-backed wooden chair, but covered in thick leather straps. You are forced into it, and every part of your body is bound. A strap goes across your forehead, another across your chest, your arms are strapped to the armrests, and your legs are strapped to the legs of the chair. A wooden box is placed over your head to block out light and sound. The pressure of the restraints is immense, and soon your limbs begin to tingle and go numb. You can hear nothing but the sound of your own muffled breathing. The theory here, as Dr. Rush explained, was to lessen the flow of blood to the brain, acting as a soft sedative to the tongue and temper. For hours, you sit in total darkness and silence, a prisoner inside your own body, supposedly being calmed. Beyond these specific inventions, there were the everyday tools of control that became a constant feature of your life. In your small, bare room, you are familiar with the rough texture of a canvas straitjacket. It was a common practice to restrain patients in them, not just during the day, but also to strap them into their beds every single night. You'd lie awake in the dark, unable to move, listening to the distant sounds of the asylum. For those considered especially difficult, there was the padded cell. You'd be placed in a small room where the walls and floor were covered in thick canvas stuffed with horsehair. The air would be dusty and stale, smelling faintly of old sweat. The padding muffled all sound, creating a profound sense of isolation. The purpose was to prevent self-injury, but the human impact was a deep and terrifying loneliness, a punishment disguised as protection. When you look at this entire system of treatment, a chilling pattern emerges. This was not a system designed for healing, it was a system designed for survival. In the 1870s, you might have noticed something odd about your fellow patients. Almost all of them were physically strong. The truth was, the treatments were so brutal that asylums would routinely refuse to admit patients they considered too frail or weak to handle them. Historians point to this practice as a damning admission from the institutions themselves. You had to be healthy enough to survive the cure. The primary concern wasn't your well-being, but whether the institution's methods could be successfully applied to you without the inconvenience of you dying. As if the hydrotherapy and mechanical restraints weren't enough, these therapies were often supplemented with other common 19th century medical practices. You might be subjected to bloodletting, where a doctor would open a vein to drain what was believed to be in excess of bad blood, or perhaps they would apply leeches to your temples to draw out impurities. On other days, you might be put on a starvation diet, the gnawing hunger in your stomach justified as a way to calm your overactive system. You feel your body getting weaker, the world narrowing down to these basic physical sensations. Each of these interventions was framed as a legitimate tool to restore your body's natural balance, but the cumulative effect was to leave you physically broken. This entire approach represents a fundamental inversion of what we now consider therapy. Instead of adapting the treatment to the patient, the goal was to violently force the patient to adapt to the institution. In this environment, your illness was often defined not by your internal suffering, but by any behavior that disrupted the rigid order of the asylum. Were you too loud? Too excitable? Did you refuse to follow an order? These were the symptoms that needed correcting. The language used by the doctors themselves confirms this. Proponents described water therapy as a corrective therapy, to encourage the patient to adopt the behavior expected of them. This is the language of discipline, not medicine. In the end, this was the quiet horror of the 19th century asylum. It wasn't just a place of confinement, but a place where science was used to systematically break the human spirit. The practice of rejecting patients who were too weak to endure the so-called treatments proves that a successful outcome was simply one the patient survived. You emerge from the ordeal not healed, but physically shattered and behaviorally docile. Your internal world, the very thing that supposedly brought you here, was completely ignored. All that mattered was your external conformity. And so, as you sit quietly in the common room, hollowed out by your core, you understand the system's true purpose. It was never about healing your mind, it was about achieving your absolute obedience. The air inside these sprawling brick buildings is heavy with the smell of carbolic acid and boiled laundry, a scent that never quite masks the underlying odor of human sweat and despair. Imagine for a moment that you've been brought here. Your hands feel clammy, and the starched fabric of the clothes you were given is rough against your skin. You're not here because you've committed a crime. You're here because someone, somewhere, has decided you are insane. For the people trapped within these walls, this was a terrifying and often permanent reality. Now, you might think there were laws to protect you, and you'd be right, in a way. In Britain, the Lunacy Act of 1845 was a major step. It created a formal commission to oversee asylums. It also required that your admission be signed off by qualified medical doctors. You hear the scratch of a pen on paper, a sound that seals your fate. This was supposed to prevent people from being locked away on a whim. But for many, these laws were just formalities, thin paper shields against a powerful system. Later on, the Lunacy Act of 1890 added another layer of protection. For private patients, it required a legal reception order from a justice of the peace. Consider the scene: you are standing in a small, wood-panelled office. The air is stale, and dust motes dance in the sliver of light coming through a tall window. You try to speak, to explain, but your voice feels small and distant. This new rule was meant to stop wrongful confinement. The truth was, it simply added one more signature to a process that was frighteningly easy to manipulate. The system was riddled with loopholes. In many parts of the United States, the process was even simpler. Imagine you are a woman in the 1870s. Your husband could have you committed with very little effort. Often, all it took was his word and the agreement of the asylum superintendent. You would have little chance to defend yourself. Your fate rests in the hands of two men who hold absolute authority over your life. The weight of this injustice feels like a physical pressure in your chest. Once you're inside, the label of insanity is nearly impossible to remove. Let's say you protest. You argue your case clearly and calmly. You demand to be heard. From your perspective, you're being perfectly rational. But from theirs, your protests are just another symptom of your delusion. You can almost hear the doctors whispering outside your door, their quiet murmurs confirming their diagnosis. Every word you say to defend your sanity is twisted into more evidence against you, tightening the trap. This was the terrifying catch-22 that kept thousands of sane people locked away, their voices silenced by the very system that claimed to be helping them. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1860, and you are a woman sitting in your own parlour. The room is stuffy, smelling faintly of wood smoke and old upholstery. You've just finished reading a book, or perhaps you've expressed an opinion that contradicts your husband's. In this era, that could be a dangerous thing to do. The definition of female insanity was deeply tied to the era's strict expectations for women. You were supposed to be quiet, obedient, and focused on domestic life. Any deviation from this path could be seen not as a personality trait, but as a medical problem. Women were uniquely vulnerable to being wrongfully committed. The reasons could be shockingly trivial. Let's look at a real list of reasons for admission from the Western State Hospital in West Virginia. Imagine your own daughter or sister being locked away for novel reading, or perhaps for laziness or overeducation. A doctor with a stern and knowing look could diagnose you with imaginary female trouble. Even something as natural as your menstrual cycle could be labelled menstrual deranged. These weren't medical conditions, they were social judgments, tools to enforce conformity. Your life, your future, could be stripped away because you didn't fit neatly into the box society built for you. Let's talk about a specific case. Welcome to the life of Elizabeth Packard. In 1860, you find her in her home in Illinois. She is intelligent and articulate. Her husband is a Calvinist minister, and she has begun to publicly question and disagree with his religious doctrines. For this act of intellectual independence, her husband had her committed to the Illinois State Hospital for the Insane. Imagine the cold shock of being declared mad simply for having your own beliefs. Elizabeth spent 3 years in that institution, a place filled with the echoing cries of its patients, the feel of cold stone floors, and the constant surveillance of the staff. Somehow, they managed to survive these ordeals. Elizabeth Packard was eventually freed, and she didn't stay silent. Her story, and the memoirs written by other women who suffered similar fates, became a powerful force. They exposed the asylum for what it often was, a tool to silence and control women. Your voice, your thoughts, your very essence could be deemed a sickness. This fight for freedom became a crucial part of the early patients' rights movement, a desperate attempt to prove that a woman's mind was her own, not a condition to be managed by her husband or her doctor. The next time you cherish a quiet moment to read a book, remember that for some women, that simple act could have cost them their freedom. Now, the asylum wasn't just for policing gender roles. As these institutions grew larger and more numerous, they became a convenient solution for a whole host of social problems. The truth was, many of the people inside had little to do with what we would now consider mental illness. The asylum became a warehouse, a place to store any person that society found difficult, inconvenient, or expensive. You could be sent there not because you were sick, but because you were in the way. Imagine you are elderly in the late 19th century. Your bones ache with a damp cold that never seems to leave. You move slowly, your family can no longer care for you, and you have no money. Initially, asylums were meant for curable cases, a place of hope and treatment. But they quickly filled up with patients deemed incurable. This included a huge number of older people suffering from what was called senile debility. For them, the asylum wasn't a hospital, it became a final, grim destination. You'd spend your last years on a rustling straw mattress, surrounded by strangers, the scent of antiseptic a constant reminder of where you were. Let's shift our focus to another group. Let's imagine you've just arrived in America in 1887. You're standing on a crowded New York street, the noise of horses and carts overwhelming your senses. The air smells of coal smoke and street food, a completely alien world. You don't speak the language, you don't understand the customs, you are utterly alone and powerless. This was the reality for countless immigrants, and it made them incredibly vulnerable. This is what the pioneering journalist Nellie Bly discovered. She went undercover in the Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell's Island to expose its conditions. What she found was shocking. To her surprise, many of her fellow inmates were not insane at all. They were women just like you in our scenario, recent immigrants who spoke little or no English. They had been arrested for small problems or for simply being poor. Unable to communicate, unable to understand the legal system, they were quickly and quietly committed. You can feel the rough wool of the institutional dress, the chill of the unheated dormitory, and the profound terror of being trapped in a place you don't understand, with no way to ask for help. The asylum became a place where society's most voiceless members could be made to disappear. It was easier to label someone as mad than to deal with the complex issues of poverty, aging, and immigration. For these people, the towering brick walls of the asylum weren't a place of refuge. They were the gates of a prison they had no way of escaping. The human impact was devastating, erasing identities and futures under the guise of medical care. Through it all, they were expected to be grateful for the roof over their heads, no matter how cold or terrifying the room beneath it was. The asylum was also used as a weapon of social and racial control. Imagine it's the period just after the American Civil War. The air is thick with tension and uncertainty. For African Americans, the promise of freedom was met with a harsh backlash. In this environment, the asylum became another tool to enforce a brutal racial hierarchy. Some white doctors began to promote a deeply racist theory that African Americans were inherently unable to handle the stresses of freedom and were therefore uniquely prone to insanity. Let's place you in the post-war South. Welcome to the Central Hospital in Virginia, one of the segregated asylums built specifically for black patients. The sun beats down, and the air is humid and heavy. You are forced to perform hard agricultural labor in the fields, or domestic work in the kitchens and laundry rooms. The work is backbreaking, from sunrise to sunset. It feels disturbingly similar to the slavery that was just outlawed. Your hands are raw from pulling weeds or scrubbing floors. The institution was not just profiting from your free labor, it was recreating the very power structures of slavery under a medical pretext. This idea of insanity from freedom was a cruel fiction. It was designed to reassert control and justify the continued oppression of an entire race. For the African Americans locked away in these places, the asylum was a continuation of bondage, not a release from it. The hope of a new life was replaced by the familiar, exhausting reality of forced labor and lost autonomy. Don't worry, the system was working exactly as intended, just not for the people it claimed to serve. When you look at the admission records from any 19th century asylum, you're not really reading a medical document. You are reading a historical record of a society's deepest fears and prejudices. Each diagnosis tells a story about what the Victorian era found threatening. Committing your wife for novel reading was about controlling female intellect. Committing an immigrant who couldn't speak English was about cleansing the social landscape of the foreign and unproductive. It was social hygiene disguised as science. In the end, the asylum's population provides a chillingly accurate map of social anxieties. The diagnoses were weapons. They enforced patriarchal control by pathologizing women's biology and behavior. They removed the poor and the elderly from public view, solving the problem of unproductive citizens. And they reasserted racial hierarchies by inventing new mental illnesses for black Americans. By defining social deviance as a medical pathology, society could use the seemingly objective authority of doctors to enforce its norms. It allowed them to dispose of their undesirables with a clear conscience. So next time you hear a complex social problem being dismissed with a simple label, remember the long, dark history of how easily those labels can become cages. For years, your world has been defined by cold stone and the heavy chafe of iron on your wrists. You are in a Parisian hospital in the late 1700s, but it feels more like a dungeon. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, waste, and misery. Each day is a blur of darkness, punctuated only by the clanging of a food tray or the harsh shouts of a guard. According to the prevailing wisdom, you are not sick. You are a beast, an animal who has lost all reason, and you are treated as such. The world has forgotten you. But then, one day, something changes. A quiet, determined physician named Philippe Pinel walks into your ward. In this moment, around 1793, you don't feel hope. You probably feel fear. You watch as Pinel speaks calmly to the keepers, his voice a stark contrast to the usual cacophony. He believes that even in your state, your reason isn't entirely gone. He argues that you are a person deserving of compassion. Then you hear an unfamiliar sound, the turning of a key in a lock, not for a cell door, but for your manacles. A keeper approaches, and with a metallic scrape, the chains fall away from your skin. You feel a sudden, shocking lightness in your arms. The cold, damp air hits skin that hasn't been exposed for years. For the first time, you are treated not as a monster, but as a patient. This small act of humanity was the dawn of a revolutionary idea called moral treatment. Now imagine yourself across the English Channel in York a few years later. You're not in a state-run hospital, but at a place called the York Retreat, founded by a Quaker tea merchant named William Tuke. He was horrified by the conditions he'd seen in other asylums. Your arrival here is a quiet affair. The building is set in the peaceful English countryside, and the air smells of freshly cut grass and damp earth, not of despair. You are greeted not by a warden, but by staff who treat you as a guest in a large, slightly unusual family home. Your new life is built on a foundation of kindness and dignity. At the York Retreat in the early 19th century, your days are given a new structure. You wake in a simple but clean room. The mattress isn't filled with rotting straw, it's comfortable. Instead of being chained to a wall, you are invited to join others for meals in a common dining room. The sound isn't of screams, but of polite, if sometimes strained, conversation. You are given light chores to do, meaningful activities that make you feel useful. You might find yourself gardening, feeling the rich soil between your fingers, or sewing in a quiet, sunlit room. This approach, as historian Roy Porter notes, was designed to re-socialize you, to gently coax your mind back towards order and calm through a predictable and supportive routine. These two men, Pennell and Tuke, working independently, lit a small flame in the overwhelming darkness. Their methods were shockingly simple: treat people like people. They believed that fresh air, good food, and purposeful activity were better medicine than chains and beatings. You, as a patient under their care, would have experienced this as a profound shift. The constant terror that had defined your existence would slowly begin to recede. It was replaced by the quiet rhythm of a life that felt, for the first time, like it was worth living. This gentle philosophy of care would soon cross the Atlantic, where it would find its most passionate and relentless champion. Let's travel to America. Imagine it's a cold Sunday in March of 1841. You are a 39-year-old retired schoolteacher from Massachusetts named Dorothea Dix. You've agreed to teach a Sunday school class for women at the East Cambridge Jail, a place of grim reputation. You walk through the heavy doors, and the air immediately turns cold and rank, smelling of unwashed bodies and human waste. The sounds of the prison echo around you, shouting, the clang of metal on metal. But it's what you find in the jail's basement that changes your life and the course of American history. Down in the unheated cellar, you find the people society has tried to forget. These are the insane, locked away with common criminals. You see men and women living in what you would later describe as the most deplorable conditions imaginable. The air is so frigid you can see your breath, yet they are given no heat. They are filthy, neglected, and isolated. You're horrified. The experience ignites something within you, a sense of profound injustice. You ask a jailer why these people are kept in such a state, and he calmly informs you that lunatics don't feel the cold. This moment of casual cruelty becomes your call to action. For the next 2 years you embark on a personal crusade. You leave your quiet life behind. You travel across the entire state of Massachusetts, a lone woman on a methodical, gut-wrenching investigation. Imagine yourself walking into every jail, every workhouse, every almshouse where the mentally ill were kept. You feel the same biting cold, smell the same putrid air, and see the same suffering over and over again. You meticulously document everything. You fill notebooks with details of the filth, the neglect, and the outright abuse. You are building a case, brick by horrifying brick, to present to the men in power. In 1843 you are ready. You present your findings to the Massachusetts State Legislature in a document known as a memorial. Your words are not gentle. They are designed to shock the conscience of the state. You write, "I proceed, gentlemen, briefly to call your attention to the present state of insane persons confined within this Commonwealth, in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience. The raw power of your testimony is undeniable. You have collected these stories, these sensory details of suffering, and you are forcing the legislature to experience them with you. The impact is explosive. Your memorial becomes a sensation, shaming politicians into action. But you don't stop there. This becomes your life's work. You take your crusade on the road, traveling from state to state, conducting the same painstaking investigations and presenting the same kind of powerful memorials. Your tireless advocacy, as documented by historians like Manon S. Parry, directly led to the founding or massive expansion of more than 30 state-funded hospitals. You, Dorothea Dix, a private citizen armed only with facts and a profound sense of empathy, single-handedly forced a nation to confront its brutal neglect of its most vulnerable citizens and build them places of refuge. Congratulations, you are now a patient in one of the new state-funded asylums that Dorothea Dix fought for. It's the mid-19th century, and your new home is a grand, imposing building. From the outside, it looks less like a hospital and more like a palace. This is no accident. This is an architectural embodiment of the moral treatment philosophy, a design known as the Kirkbride Plan. The man behind it, a Philadelphia psychiatrist named Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride, believed the very building you live in could be a special apparatus for the care of lunacy. Your therapy begins the moment you step onto the grounds. Imagine arriving at one of these institutions. The first thing you notice is the space. The asylum is situated on a vast estate, often over 100 acres of beautifully landscaped grounds. The air smells of pine trees and blooming flowers, a world away from the stench of the jail you just left. You see rolling hills, peaceful groves, and perhaps a working farm in the distance. Kirkbride mandated this setting to provide you with tranquil views, and more importantly, opportunities for healthy outdoor exercise and work. Just looking out your window is considered part of your treatment. Now look at the building itself. Its most defining feature is what's called a bat wing floor plan. Long, staggered wings jut out from a central administration building. This wasn't just for style. You walk down the hallway of your new ward, and you realize it's unusually narrow. There are windows on both sides. This was Kirkbride's genius. This design ensures that every part of the ward, from the hallways to the patient rooms, receives maximum exposure to natural sunlight and fresh air. You can feel the sun warming your skin through the glass, and a gentle breeze circulates through the corridor. These simple sensations were considered powerful tools for healing a troubled mind. Your living quarters are a revelation. Instead of a crowded, filthy cell, you are given a private room. It's simple, but it is your own space. The door doesn't have bars, it's a regular door. Within your ward, there are also shared parlours and dining rooms, designed to feel like a comfortable home. The furniture is sturdy but pleasant. The intention is to foster a sense of domesticity and community. You are encouraged to dine with others, to engage in conversation, to rebuild the social bonds that your illness may have broken. The entire environment is carefully crafted to soothe your senses and restore your spirit. For a time, these Kirkbride asylums represented a high point of therapeutic optimism. You are part of an ambitious experiment to create a perfect healing environment. The belief was that by controlling every aspect of your surroundings, the air you breathe, the light you see, the ground you walk on, your mind could be gently guided back to health. This was architecture as therapy, a beautiful, hopeful dream made real through brick and mortar. The goal wasn't just to confine you, but to cure you. But as with many grand dreams, the reality would prove far more complicated. But here's the thing about dreams. They are fragile. You're living in this grand Kirkbride asylum, this palace for lunatics, and for a while, the system works. But slowly, you begin to notice a change. The quiet hallways start to feel more crowded. The peaceful parlours become noisy and chaotic. More and more beds are squeezed into spaces that were meant to be open. The very success of reformers like Dorothea Dix had created a new, unforeseen problem. The state-funded institutions they had fought so hard to build were becoming overwhelmed. The dream was beginning to decay from the inside. The problem, in the late 19th century, was one of scale. As counties realized they could transfer their most difficult and expensive cases, the pauper lunatic populations, to these new state asylums, the floodgates opened. An asylum designed by Dr. Kirkbride to comfortably house perhaps 250 patients soon found itself crammed with 1,000 or more. You feel the difference every day. The staff, once attentive and kind, are now rushed and exhausted. There simply aren't enough of them to provide the personalized moral treatment that the system was founded on. Your name is forgotten, you are now just another body in a sea of faces. With this chronic overcrowding came chronic underfunding. State legislatures, as historian Gerald Grob points out, were happy to fund the construction of these impressive buildings, but they were unwilling to pay for the massive staff and resources needed to actually run them properly. The high staff-to-patient ratio that moral treatment required was the first thing to go. Your access to the doctor shrinks from regular conversations to a fleeting glimpse once a week, if you're lucky. the beautiful therapeutic grounds become something you only see from your window, as there isn't enough staff to supervise outdoor activities. The entire philosophy begins to revert. The system collapses under its own weight, turning from a therapeutic model back into a purely custodial one. Therapeutic work on the farm devolves back into forced labor to keep the massive institution running. Overwhelmed and undertrained staff, with no other options, resort to the old ways. The mechanical restraints that Pinnell so dramatically abolished come back out of the storerooms. Straitjackets and powerful sedatives become the cheapest and easiest tools for managing 1,000 desperate people. The early optimism fades, replaced by what historians call a bleak custodial pessimism. Your palace has become a warehouse once more. This is the tragic irony of the Great Reform movement. In solving the problem of scattered, unregulated neglect in jails and almshouses, the reformers created a new one: massive, centralized, and dependent populations that the state could not, or would not, adequately support. They won the political battle to build the asylums, but in doing so, they inadvertently created the very conditions that made their humane philosophy impossible to sustain. You are now living in the shell of a beautiful idea. The grand building remains, a monument to a forgotten dream, but its soul is gone. The great 19th century asylums may have crumbled, their iron gates may be rusted shut, and their wards silent. But their story didn't end when the last patient left. The real-world horrors that happened inside those walls, the suffering, the abuse, the slow chipping away of a person's identity didn't stay locked in the past. They seeped out, like a fine mist, into the public imagination. They created a powerful and enduring archetype of the madhouse that continues to both fascinate and terrify you. This legacy is a strange, self-perpetuating cycle, a story where historical tragedy inspired fictional horror, which in turn fuels our modern world in ways you might not even realize. Imagine for a moment, you're living in the latter half of the 19th century. By the flickering light of a gas lamp, you settle into your armchair to read. The wind howls outside your window, rattling the glass. The book in your hands is a new Gothic novel, and you soon find yourself inside the cold, labyrinthine corridors of a private asylum. For writers of the period, the asylum was the perfect vessel for the genre's most potent themes. It was the ultimate symbol of isolation and imprisonment. It was a place where the lines between reason and madness blurred into a terrifying grey haze. For readers, this hit close to home. The sheer terror of losing your identity inside an oppressive structure was a very real anxiety. Authors seized upon this collective fear, using the asylum as a stage to explore the public's darkest worries. In 1859, you might have picked up Wilkie Collins's sensation novel, The Woman in White. In its pages, the asylum is presented as a sinister tool of patriarchal control. You are introduced to the gentle heroine, Laura Fairley. She is drugged and secretly committed to a private asylum by her villainous husband. He does this to steal her fortune, passing her off as another woman who has recently died. Suddenly, you feel her powerlessness. The cold stone of the institution feels very real. Imagine her confusion, the thick, damp air of her room tasting of despair. Every time Laura tries to assert her true identity, the doctors and nurses dismiss her words as part of her delusion. According to historical analysis of the novel, this was a classic Gothic trope. It's the ultimate nightmare, the sane person trapped in a world that insists they are mad. You can feel the cold dread of her situation. She is a prisoner not just of the asylum, but of a system designed to silence her. The experience utterly shatters her spirit, leaving her with fragmented memories and a weakened mind. She becomes a ghost of her former self, a living testament to the fear of wrongful confinement. A few decades later, perhaps you're reading another hugely popular novel from 1897, Bram Stoker's Dracula. In one of its subplots, you are taken inside Dr. John Seward's asylum. The air here is heavy with the scent of antiseptic and something else, something metallic and unsettling. Here you meet the patient Renfield. You watch his strange and disturbing obsession, what Dr. Seward calls his zoophagous mania. Renfield believes he can gain the life force of other creatures by eating them, starting with flies, then spiders, then birds. His mania feels deeply unnatural, and you soon learn why. Stoker explicitly links Renfield's deteriorating mental state to the supernatural influence of the vampire Dracula. The patient's madness becomes a chilling symptom of the monster's proximity. For you, the reader, This connection forges a powerful and terrifying association. It links mental illness directly to the monstrous, the inhuman, and the evil. The asylum is no longer just a place for the unfortunate and the sick. It has become a dark stage where human frailty meets supernatural horror. These novels weren't just simple thrillers for their time. They tapped into and amplified a genuine public fear, cementing the asylum in your mind as a place of profound psychological terror. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, a new and powerful technology arrived to tell these stories. The asylum's dark legacy transitioned seamlessly from the page to the flickering light of the silver screen. It quickly became a staple of the horror genre, finding a permanent new home in your local movie theatre. Imagine sitting in that darkened room, the air hazy with smoke, the whirring of the film projector a constant hum in the background. The terror of the asylum, once confined to your imagination, was now larger than life, right before your eyes. Some of the earliest and most influential horror films drew their power directly from this dark history. Imagine yourself in 1920 watching the German expressionist masterpiece, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. You are immediately pulled into a strange, unsettling world. The sets are made of painted canvas with distorted buildings, crooked walls, and impossibly long, sharp shadows. Everything feels off balance, like a nightmare you can't wake up from. As the film concludes, a twist reveals that the entire bizarre story may have been the delusion of the narrator, who you now see as a patient in a psychiatric institution. This framing device was revolutionary, leaving you to question the very nature of reality and sanity. Fast forward to 1946. You're in the theatre again, this time for a film called Bedlam, produced by the legendary horror impresario Val Lewton. This film, set in the historical Bethlehem Hospital of the 18th century, takes a different approach. You feel a creeping sense of dread, but it doesn't come from the patients. They are portrayed with a quiet dignity, as victims of a broken system. Instead, the true horror stems from the asylum's master. He is a cruel, calculating, and perfectly sane man who exploits his patients for the entertainment of London's wealthy elite. You watch as he parades them around like animals in a zoo. Through it all, you feel a more profound and disturbing kind of horror. The monster isn't madness itself, but the cold, rational abuse of power. The film suggests the most dangerous people in the asylum are the ones holding the keys. It was a rare and nuanced portrayal, placing the blame squarely on the institutional cruelty rather than on the mentally ill. Somehow, the filmmakers managed to find the humanity in the horror. Unfortunately, this thoughtful approach often got lost over the following decades, giving way to a much more simplistic and damaging trope. In the years that followed, the asylum in movies became less a place of tragedy and more a factory for monsters. The escaped mental patient evolved into a lazy but effective horror movie cliché. You know the formula well. A crackly news report announces that a dangerous patient has broken out of the nearby maximum security sanitarium. This trope is most famously embodied by Michael Myers in the 1978 film Halloween. His escape from the Smith's Grove Sanitarium is the catalyst for his entire reign of terror. This narrative directly and powerfully links mental institutions with a form of pure, unstoppable, and often silent evil. This cinematic evolution gave you a clear visual shorthand for violent insanity. When you see a straitjacket on screen, your mind is trained to think of uncontrollable rage, not a desperate attempt at therapeutic restraint. You see a stark, white, padded cell, and you instantly picture a person completely lost to reason. You see an electroshock machine, and it's almost always presented not as a medical procedure, but as a visceral tool of torture. According to media historians, these powerful images became deeply ingrained in the public consciousness, further cementing the harmful association between mental illness and danger for generations of moviegoers. You might assume that the days of the public paying a shilling to gawk at the beasts of Bedlam are a distant, more barbaric past. But the impulse behind that practice never really went away. It has simply changed its clothes, adapted to a new era, and been given a new name. It draws a direct and unsettling line from the 18th century spectacle to a thoroughly modern phenomenon. Welcome to the world of dark tourism. In the 21st century, a massive global industry has quietly emerged around visiting sites of death, disaster, and suffering. You can plan an entire vacation around it. You can walk the cold, narrow cell blocks of Alcatraz, the salty air whipping around you. You can stand on the quiet, mournful grounds of the Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. You can even take a guided tour through the abandoned city of Pripyat, feeling the eerie silence in the air near the Chernobyl nuclear disaster site. People travel from all over the world for this, driven by a complex mix of historical curiosity, a desire for remembrance, and the simple human urge to stand in a place where momentous events happened. Crucially, this tourism industry has found a profitable new niche, the very asylums whose history we have been exploring. Those imposing, decaying Kirkbride buildings have become prime destinations. You can now buy a ticket to walk the same halls where thousands of people lived and died. Let's say you're in West Virginia, standing before the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. It's a vast, Gothic structure of brick and stone, stretching out like a series of bat wings. Once a palace for the insane, it now operates as one of America's foremost dark tourism attractions. The air itself seems heavy with history. During the day, you can join a historical tour. A guide leads you through the long, echoing corridors, pointing out architectural details and sharing sanitized stories of the hospital's past. But when night falls, the atmosphere changes entirely. The temperature seems to drop. The business shifts from history to horror. You can pay to join a paranormal ghost hunt, armed with a flashlight and an EMF meter, deliberately seeking out the creepy thrills that come from being in a place associated with so much past suffering. You walk through the decaying wards, your footsteps the only sound, every shadow playing tricks on your eyes. This is where the experience gets ethically complicated. When you pay for a ghost hunt in a former asylum, you are consuming the tragedy of others as a form of leisure. You are seeking a shiver down your spine in the exact location where real people experience profound despair, loneliness, and fear. The peeling paint and rusted bed frames are no longer just historical artifacts, they are props in a theatrical experience designed for your entertainment. Don't worry, the experience is carefully curated to be scary but safe, a commercialized version of the horror. This modern practice raises the same profound questions as its 19th century predecessor. Is this truly honoring the memory of the thousands of anonymous people who suffered within these walls? Or is it a new form of exploitation, commodifying their pain for commercial profit? The motivation may have shifted from moral gawking to a search for paranormal evidence. But the fundamental act remains disturbingly familiar. You are still paying for a ticket to a show where the main attraction is human suffering. The souvenir shop at the exit is just a modern addition. The spectacle of Bedlam, it seems, is still open for business. So, after centuries of real suffering, fictional horror, and commercial exploitation, what is the final legacy? The shadow of the asylum has left a deep and lasting scar on your public understanding of mental illness. It's a scar that continues to shape how you think and what you fear. The institution itself has been transformed into something more than just a historical place. It has become the ultimate cultural symbol for some of your deepest anxieties, the fear of losing your mind, of losing your identity, and of being locked away from the world. In our collective imagination, the horror tropes that the asylum spawned have a real-world cost. The violent patient, the evil doctor, the torturous treatments, these are not just harmless movie cliches. According to researchers who study media and mental health, they actively fuel stigma. Every time a film shows an escaped mental patient as a mindless killer, it reinforces a harmful and deeply inaccurate link between mental health conditions and danger. This makes it harder for real people to talk about their struggles and seek help, fearing how you and the rest of society might see them. And you can still see the physical reminders of this history all around you. Across the country, the imposing Gothic structures of the great Kirkbride asylums still stand. Many are abandoned, their ornate towers crumbling and their hundreds of windows like vacant, staring eyes. You might drive past one on a misty evening and feel an involuntary chill. They are haunting monuments to a time when society's grand solution to the complexities of the human mind was to build palaces for lunatics, and then forget about the people inside. Their decaying architecture is a constant, visible reminder of this heavy past. All of this has combined to create a powerful and self-sustaining cultural feedback loop. It's a cycle that constantly reinforces itself, ensuring the asylum shadow never truly fades. Think about how the cycle works for a moment. It's a four-step process that connects the past directly to your present experience. First, the real-world horror of the 19th century asylum provided the raw material. The genuine suffering and isolation gave authors and later filmmakers a deep, dark well of human drama to draw from. Second, this compelling fictional horror solidified a public perception. The stories you read and the movies you watched cemented the idea of madness as something monstrous and terrifying. It became a reliable source of thrills. Third, this deep-seated cultural fascination, that potent mix of fear and curiosity you feel when you hear the word asylum, created a commercial market. Modern dark tourism directly exploits this fascination. It sells you a ticket to a curated, sanitized experience of the original horror. And fourth, in doing so, it reinforces the site's cultural status as a place of terror. The ghost hunt you go on becomes a new story, which might inspire a new movie or podcast, perpetuating the stigma and keeping the cycle going. In the end, the asylum is no longer just a historical institution. It has become a living archetype in our culture, seemingly doomed to endlessly replay its own tragic story. Its long shadow stretches from a gaslit 19th century ward, through the flickering light of a movie projector, across the internet, and right into your world today. The real people who lived and died in those places are often forgotten, but the ghost of Bedlam, the one we created in our stories, is with us still. And so, we close the patient files for the night. The keys turn in the ward locks one last time, leaving behind the profound quiet that follows so much systemic sorrow. We've walked the cold, damp galleries and seen how an institution, born from a flawed seed of care, became a warehouse for society's unwanted, a machine for enforcing conformity. As you begin to drift, perhaps you can still hear the faint, desperate pleas of Elizabeth Packard, a silent echo in the institutional stillness. Thank you for finding this quiet space with us tonight. It's a somber but necessary comfort to know we've stood witness to these lost stories together. The chronicle of the asylum is now complete and ready to be sealed in the archives, but the record is not truly finished without the mark of those who bore witness. Consider a like on the video, your personal signature on the witness statement pressed onto this digital case file, attesting to the histories you've just heard. And to subscribe to the channel, that is to file a standing request with the custodian of these records, me to be notified whenever a new, forgotten wing of the archive is opened for viewing. It is the only way to ensure these voices are never truly silenced again. For now, let the sound of my voice become a distant echo. The archives are sealed for the night. The reformer's pleas have been heard. The Kirkbride wings are dark. There is nothing more to diagnose, nothing more to endure. Just allow the quiet of the present moment to settle over you and drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. The stories of Bedlam will be here, held safely in the archive, when you return. Good night.